The slap cracked through the Rosewood Grand Ballroom like thunder. 100 guests went dead silent. My glasses flew from my face, shattering on the marble floor beneath the twinkling chandeliers. My cheek stung, but the pain in my heart ran far deeper. Avery Morgan, my brand new daughter-in-law, stood before me, flawless in her designer white gown, her manicured hand still suspended in the air. The diamond on her finger caught the light, glinting like the tears forming in my eyes. "You don't need that place anymore," she had screamed moments before. "We're building a family now. Nathan and I deserve it more than some old woman living alone." My son Nathan didn't say a word. He stood behind her, his eyes fixed on his polished shoes, refusing to meet my gaze. The silence of the guests, the cameras still rolling from the wedding live stream, the floral arrangements trembling from the nearby bass, none of it could distract from the sting of her words and the heat spreading across my face. When I had refused to hand over my keys, she slapped me. Right there, in front of everyone. I crouched to gather the pieces of my glasses, my hands shaking, shame burning through me like wildfire. I could hear whispers starting to ripple through the crowd. Someone stepped forward, Harold, my neighbor of 15 years, but I waved him away. This wasn't his battle. Standing up slowly, I straightened my simple blue dress, the one I'd spent weeks choosing, wanting to look my best for my only son's wedding. I touched my burning cheek and took a deep breath. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need some air." I walked across the ballroom floor, past the towering wedding cake, past the confused band members, past the table where I should have been seated as the mother of the groom. With each step, I felt the weight of 78 years of life, of love given freely, of sacrifices made silently. Outside, the Austin night air was warm and heavy. Stars peeked through the city glow, indifferent to the human drama unfolding below. I pulled out my old flip phone, the one Avery always mocked, and made one call. "Michael, it's Eleanor. Bring the papers. Bring the notary. Bring the truth." I hadn't wanted it to come to this. For 2 years, I'd watched Avery's true nature reveal itself, calculating and cold. I'd hoped my son would see it too, that he'd remember the values his father and I had taught him. But love, or what he thought was love, had blinded him. How did we get here? The question echoed in my mind as I sat on a stone bench in the garden of the Rosewood Grand, surrounded by roses that reminded me of the ones I tended at my apartment, the one they wanted to take from me. My mind drifted back to when it all began. Robert and I had always lived modestly. We bought our first property when Nathan was just a baby, a small fixer-upper in what was then an overlooked part of Austin. Robert, with his contractor skills, transformed it while I managed our budget down to the penny. We sold it for double what we paid, then did it again. And again. "Never let them know what you're worth, Ellie," Robert used to say. "The world treats you differently when they think you have nothing to offer but your heart." By the time Robert passed away 10 years ago, we owned 6 properties across the city, including the Silver Oaks condo where I now lived. But I kept our wealth quiet, even from Nathan. Especially from Nathan. Robert and I had seen how money changed people, how it bred entitlement instead of gratitude. We wanted our son to build his own life, to know the satisfaction of earning something himself. When Nathan brought Avery home 2 years ago, I knew immediately. The way her eyes swept over my modest furnishings, measuring, assessing, the subtle sneer when she saw my kitchen, the calculated questions about the building, the neighborhood, the value of similar units. "It's just such a waste," she'd said one day while Nathan was out picking up dinner. "All this space for one person in such a prime location." I'd simply smiled and offered her more tea. The comments continued, growing bolder with time. "At your age, it's dangerous to live alone. There are some lovely senior living communities nearby. Think how helpful it would be if we lived closer to you." What Nathan never knew, what I made sure he never knew, was that I was already supporting them. The anonymous credit card payments when he fell behind, the mysterious corporate sponsor who covered half their wedding expenses, the lucky break rental discount on their current apartment, courtesy of a property owner who happened to be one of my corporations. I wanted to give my son the world. I just didn't want the world to know I was giving it. Until tonight. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. 10 minutes away. I took another deep breath and looked back at the glittering ballroom through the glass doors. Inside, life was continuing. The band had resumed playing. People were dancing, though many were still huddled in conversation. no doubt discussing what they'd witnessed. And there, at the center of it all, was Avery, already laughing, with her bridesmaids as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just assaulted her mother-in-law in front of 100 witnesses, as if I were already forgotten, disposable, a mere inconvenience in her perfect life. I touched my cheek again. The sting had faded, but the humiliation remained. For a moment, I considered leaving. I could slip away, avoid further confrontation, return to my apartment and lock the door against the world. That would be the easy path, the one I'd often taken. Quiet Eleanor, unassuming Eleanor, Eleanor who never makes waves. But Robert wouldn't have wanted that. The man who taught me to invest boldly but live humbly would have expected more of me. Stand tall, Ellie, I could almost hear him say. You've earned your place. So I stood, smoothed my dress, and waited for Michael's car to pull up to the entrance. When it did, I was ready. The notary, a young woman with kind eyes, looked at me with concern. Ms. James, are you all right? Your cheek is red. I'm fine, dear, I replied, just clearing the way for some truth. As we walked back toward the ballroom, documents in hand, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This wasn't about revenge or humiliation. This was about dignity, mine, and perhaps even my son's, though he might not see it that way yet. The truth, after all, can be as gentle or as devastating as the moment requires. Tonight, it would be both. When Nathan was 7 years old, he broke his arm falling from the oak tree in our backyard. At the hospital, while they set his bone, he gripped my hand so tightly I thought my fingers might break too. Through his tears, he kept repeating one thing. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. He wasn't apologizing for climbing the tree. We had always encouraged adventure. He was sorry because he knew hospital bills were expensive, and he'd heard Robert and me discussing budget cuts the night before. What he didn't know was that we had more than enough money to cover any emergency. The budget discussions had been about our property investments, not our household necessities. But in that moment, I saw how deeply children absorb their parents' worries, real or perceived. Never apologize for needing care, sweetheart, I told him. That's what family does. We take care of each other, no matter what. Those words echoed in my mind as Michael, the notary, and I approached the ballroom doors. Would Nathan remember that lesson? Or had Avery's influence completely erased the values we'd worked so hard to instill? The band was playing a slow song as we entered. Couples swayed on the dance floor, including Nathan and Avery. She had her head on his shoulder, her eyes closed, the picture of bridal bliss. The scene was so at odds with the violence she'd displayed earlier that it took my breath away. Harold spotted us first. My faithful neighbor had been watching the door, waiting for my return. He nodded slightly, a silent signal of support. Next to him sat his wife, Clara, who had been my confidant since Robert's passing. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Michael whispered as we paused at the edge of the room. More sure than I've ever been, I replied. The song ended, and in the brief silence that followed, Michael cleared his throat and stepped forward. Excuse me, he called, his voice carrying across the room. I need everyone's attention for a moment. The murmurs began immediately. Avery's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she spotted me standing beside a stranger with a briefcase. Who are you? She demanded, striding across the dance floor, her gown rustling with each aggressive step. My name is Michael Torres. I'm Ms. Eleanor James's financial advisor and attorney. He spoke calmly but loudly enough for everyone to hear. And this is Andrea Wilson, a licensed notary. Nathan appeared behind Avery, confusion written across his face, the same expression he'd worn when he was a child trying to understand why we couldn't buy a new game console when all his friends had one. Mom, what's going on? His voice was uncertain, caught between concern and embarrassment. What's going on? I said, stepping forward. Is that it's time for some truth. Avery laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the tension. Truth? About what? How selfish you're being about your apartment? How you're ruining our wedding day with your dramatics? I didn't respond to her. Instead, I looked directly at my son. Nathan, I've never told you everything about our family's finances. Your father and I made that choice deliberately. We wanted you to build your own life, to work for what you wanted. What are you talking about? His brow furrowed. Michael opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Ms. James has asked me to make certain facts known. To you and your bride, as well as to your guests, since Ms. Morgan chose to make a private matter very public earlier. Avery's parents had joined us now, her father's face flushed with either embarrassment or anger, probably both. This is inappropriate, he began, but Michael held up a hand. With respect, sir, what was inappropriate was your daughter physically assaulting Ms. James and demanding her property in front of all these witnesses. I believe several people captured it on video. The room had gone completely still again. Even the servers had paused, trays in hand, sensing the dramatic shift in atmosphere. Michael handed me the first document. I recognized it immediately, a property deed. Nathan, this is the deed to Silver Oaks condos. Not just my unit, the entire building. Your father and I purchased it 20 years ago as an investment. It's worth approximately $4 million now. Nathan's eyes widened. Avery's mouth opened, then closed. That's just the beginning, I continued as Michael handed me another document. This is a list of all properties currently owned by James Family Holdings, LLC. 6 commercial buildings in downtown Austin, 2 residential complexes in San Antonio, a vacation property in Galveston. Each revelation landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. My total net worth as of last month's evaluation is just over $7.4 million. Gasps echoed around the room. Nathan staggered slightly, reaching for a nearby chair to steady himself. But you live so simply, he stammered. Your clothes, your car, your father and I believed in living below our means, I explained. We wanted financial security, not status symbols. Avery had gone completely pale, the color draining from her face like water from a broken glass. I took another document from Michael. This one might interest you most, Avery. It's a record of payments made from my personal account to support you and Nathan over the past 3 years. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. What payments? We never asked you for money. No, you didn't. But Nathan was struggling with credit card debt after losing his job, and you were planning an extravagant wedding you couldn't afford. So I helped, anonymously. I handed the paper to Nathan, whose hands shook as he read it. The corporate sponsor who covered half your wedding expenses? That was me. The rental discount on your apartment? Also me. I own the building through one of my corporations. The mysterious payment that cleared your credit card debt last Christmas? Me again. Mom? Nathan's voice broke. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to stand on your own feet. And I was afraid that if you knew, you might... Might what? He asked. I looked at Avery, then back at my son. Might attract people who loved your wallet more than your heart. The implication hung in the air between us, impossible to ignore. Avery's face contorted with rage. You think I'm with Nathan for money? Money I didn't even know existed? No, I said quietly. I think you're with Nathan for what you thought you could get from me. Silence blanketed the ballroom. The glittering chandeliers seemed to dim, as if even they were holding their breath. Avery's face had transformed from rage to shock to something more calculating, the gears visibly turning behind her eyes as she assessed this new information, this new version of me she hadn't anticipated. You're lying, she finally said, her voice thin and strained. You're making this all up to embarrass me. Michael stepped forward, his professional demeanor unwavering. I can assure you, Ms. Morgan, every document here is legitimate and legally binding. I've been Ms. James's financial advisor for 25 years. Nathan stood frozen, staring at the paper in his hands. Evidence of my silent support. Years of help he never knew about. The credit card debt, the wedding. Sponsor, that was you? I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to help, but your father and I always believed that knowing you have a safety net can sometimes prevent you from learning to fly. So you've been... what? Testing us? His voice cracked with confusion. No, sweetheart. I've been loving you the only way I knew how. I turned to the notary. Andrea, please verify the documents for anyone who wishes to see them. Avery's father stepped forward then, his face a mask of practiced charm. Eleanor, surely we can discuss this privately. This is hardly appropriate for a wedding reception. I met his gaze steadily. I would have preferred that, Mr. Morgan. But when your daughter demanded my apartment keys, and then struck me in front of everyone, she made our private business very public. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several guests nodded in agreement. You have to understand, Avery interjected, suddenly softening her tone, wrapping her arm around Nathan's. We're just thinking about the future, about family. That apartment would be perfect for when we have children. Your grandchildren. Wouldn't you want that? The manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. Almost. What I want, I said clearly, is respect. What I want is for my son to remember that I raised him to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. especially when it's difficult. I turned back to Michael, who handed me the final document. This was the hardest part. The decision I'd made 3 weeks ago when I overheard Avery on the phone with her mother, laughing about the old lady's apartment and how they'd move her somewhere more appropriate after the wedding. This, I said, holding the paper up, is a revised will. As of today, I've removed Nathan as my primary beneficiary. Nathan staggered backward as if I'd been the one to slap him. Mom? Instead, I've established a trust. Half of my estate will go to charitable organizations, supporting victims of elder abuse and financial exploitation. The remaining half will be held in trust for any grandchildren I might have, with 2 conditions. I looked directly at Avery now. First, they must establish a relationship with me of their own free will, not for financial gain. And second, their parents must demonstrate a pattern of respect and integrity toward me for a minimum of 5 years, as evaluated by my trustee. Avery's face contorted with rage and disbelief. You can't do that. I already have. I handed the document to Andrea, who notarized it on the spot. Nathan finally found his voice. Mom, please, you're overreacting. Avery didn't mean... Don't. I held up my hand. Don't diminish what happened here tonight. Don't make excuses for behavior you would never have tolerated before you met her. Harold stepped forward then, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. I saw what happened, Nathan. Your mother isn't exaggerating. Your wife assaulted her in front of everyone because she wouldn't hand over her home. Other guests nodded in agreement. Phones were out. I realized with a jolt that some had recorded the incident. This wasn't just happening in this room anymore. It was potentially spreading across social media, across our community. I think, Michael said gently, that we should conclude this discussion for now. Ms. James has made her position clear, and this is, after all, still a wedding celebration. Avery's mother snorted. Some celebration, ruined by a bitter old woman who can't stand to see her son happy. I turned to her, summoning every ounce of grace I possessed. I want nothing more than my son's happiness, Mrs. Morgan. I simply believe that true happiness cannot be built on disrespect and entitlement. I gathered my documents and nodded to Michael and Andrea. Thank you both for coming. I think I'll head home now. Nathan stepped toward me, his face a battlefield of emotions. Mom, don't leave like this. We can talk about it, figure something out. We will talk, Nathan, but not tonight. Tonight you should be with your bride. I touched his cheek softly. I love you. I have always loved you. That will never change, no matter what. With that, I turned and walked out of the ballroom, head high, back straight. Behind me, I heard the chaos erupting. Avery's high-pitched accusations, her parents' damage, control, guests buzzing with the drama they'd witnessed. Outside in the warm Austin night, Harold caught up with me. Eleanor, let me drive you home. Thank you, Harold, but I have my car. You're shaking, and you don't have your glasses. I hadn't even realized, but he was right. My hands trembled, and the world beyond a few feet was a soft blur. I suppose you're right. As we drove through the streets of Austin, the city lights smearing into watercolor strokes without my glasses, I felt an overwhelming sense of both loss and liberation. I had revealed truths I'd kept hidden for decades. I had stood up to bullying and disrespect. But at what cost? Do you think I went too far? I asked Harold as we pulled up to Silver Oaks. He considered the question carefully. I think you did what was necessary. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones most worth telling. I nodded, thinking of Robert, of what he would have said. Probably something pragmatic yet profound, just like Harold. Will you be all right alone tonight? Harold asked as we reached my door. I've been alone for 10 years. I reminded him with a small smile. I think I can manage one more night. But after Harold left, after I changed out of my blue dress and removed my pearl earrings, Robert's gift on our 30th anniversary, the apartment felt emptier than it ever had. I moved through the rooms, touching photographs, memories, the life I'd built. In the kitchen, I made a cup of chamomile tea and stared out at the Austin skyline. The city had changed so much since Robert and I bought our first property. Skyscrapers where there used to be empty lots. Luxury condos where family businesses once thrived. Change was inevitable, I supposed. But some things shouldn't change. Respect, integrity, standing up for one's dignity. I sipped my tea and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Would Nathan call? Would he see what had really happened, or would Avery's version of events prevail in his mind? Only time would tell. But for the first time in years, I felt truly seen. Not as Nathan's mother, or Robert's widow, or the quiet old lady in apartment 1507, just as Eleanor James, a woman who had finally found her voice. The phone started ringing at 7:13 the next morning. I let it go to voicemail, sipping my coffee by the kitchen window where morning light spilled across the granite countertop. The same window where I'd stood countless times, watching the city wake up, planning investments with Robert, bouncing baby Nathan on my hip. By 9:30, I had 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. 9 from Nathan, all variations of, "We need to talk." 5 from Avery's parents, oscillating between veiled threats and desperate negotiations. 3 from Harold and Clara, checking on my well-being. And remarkably, 1 from Avery herself. "This isn't over." Just 3 words, but they carried the weight of a promise. Or a threat. I placed my phone face down on the counter and refilled my coffee cup. The morning after my son's wedding, and here I was, alone in my apartment with a throbbing cheek and a head full of memories that suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's life. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Nathan, still in yesterday's suit, minus the tie, his face haggard from what appeared to be a sleepless night. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Mom!" He stepped forward as if to hug me, then seemed to think better of it, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing him into the apartment where he'd grown up, where he'd brought Avery 2 years ago, where everything had begun to unravel. "Where's your wife?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "At her parents'. We had a disagreement after you left." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Mom, why didn't you tell me about the money? About the properties? About any of it?" I gestured for him to sit at the kitchen table. Would it have mattered? Would it have changed anything? Of course it would have. I wouldn't have. He stopped himself, but not before I caught his meaning. "Wouldn't have what, Nathan? Struggled to find your way? Worked those extra shifts at the restaurant during college? Learned the value of earning something yourself?" I sat across from him. "Or wouldn't have married Avery if you'd known you were a millionaire's son?" He flinched. "That's not fair, isn't it? You've changed since you met her, Nathan. The son I raised would never have stood by while anyone, treated his mother the way Avery treated me last night." She was stressed. The wedding, the pressure from her family. She just snapped. He couldn't meet my eyes. "She's not usually like that, isn't she? The comments about my age, about how I'm wasting this apartment, about how much better use you two could make of it, those haven't been happening for months?" His silence was answer enough. "Nathan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." I reached across the table, taking his hands in mine. "Did you know she was going to demand my keys last night? Was that planned?" He pulled his, hands away, and the gesture broke my heart more than any slap could. "Not exactly. We'd discussed approaching you about the apartment after the honeymoon, but then you were being distant at the reception, and Avery thought you were trying to ruin our special day, and it just escalated." "I was being distant?" I echoed in disbelief. "Nathan, I wasn't seated at the family table. I was placed with distant cousins and neighbors while Avery's entire extended family had prime spots." His eyes widened slightly. "What? No, that can't be right. We approved the seating chart together. Check the actual arrangements. I suspect you'll find several last-minute changes made without your knowledge." I stood up, moving to the cabinet where I kept my important papers. "While you're at it, you might want to look at these." I handed him a folder containing emails, texts, and notes I'd been gathering for months. Evidence of Avery's true nature when Nathan wasn't around. The accidental coffee spill on my favorite blouse at Sunday brunch. The time she forgot to include me in the Mother's Day celebration. The seating chart for the rehearsal dinner that placed me at the very back of the restaurant. Small things, petty things, but part of a pattern I couldn't ignore. "I don't understand," Nathan said, flipping through the pages. "Why would she do this?" "Because I was in the way," I said simply. "Of your attention, of your loyalty, and ultimately, of this apartment." Nathan looked up, his expression pained. "Mom, about the money, about the will, that's not up for discussion today." I was firm, but gentle. "My decision stands." "But it's so extreme, cutting me out completely." "Not completely. I've created conditions that any reasonable person would find fair. Treat me with respect. Allow your children, if you have them, to know their grandmother. That's all I'm asking for." He stood up abruptly, pacing the living room. "And what about Avery? She made one mistake. Assaulting me in public is not one mistake, Nathan. It's a crime. And it's a glimpse into who she truly is when she doesn't get her way. I followed him, keeping my voice level. I'm not asking you to choose between us. I'm asking you to open your eyes. My eyes are wide open. I love her, Mom. We're married now. You can't just rewrite the rules because you don't like her. This isn't about liking her. This is about respecting me. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. The same one I'd felt when he was a teenager, pushing boundaries, testing limits. Nathan, you're a grown man. You've made your choice, and I respect that. Now I've made mine. He turned to face me, his expression hardening. So that's it? You're choosing money over family? The accusation stung, but I held my ground. No, I'm choosing dignity over enabling disrespect. There's a difference. We stood in silence, the gap between us widening with each unspoken word. Finally, Nathan moved toward the door. I need some time to think. This is a lot. Take all the time you need. I followed him, my heart breaking a little more with each step. I'll be here. This is my home after all. He paused at the door, his hand on the knob. For what it's worth, I am sorry about what happened last night. You didn't deserve that. No, I agreed quietly. I didn't. After he left, I sank onto the sofa, emotionally drained. The apartment felt emptier than before, haunted by the ghosts of what might have been, of the family I'd hoped Nathan would create, of grandchildren running through these rooms. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Clara and I are bringing lunch. No arguments. I smiled despite myself. In the midst of family turmoil, it was good to be reminded that family wasn't always defined by blood. An hour later, as we sat around my dining table sharing a meal and conversation that carefully avoided last night's events, my phone rang again. Michael's number flashed on the screen. Eleanor, he said without preamble. Have you seen the news? What news? Turn on Channel 8. I did, and there it was. Grainy cell phone footage of Avery slapping me, demanding my keys, the shocked reaction of the guests. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Wedding night assault, bride attacks mother-in-law over property. Oh my God, I whispered, sinking back onto the sofa. It had gone viral. The footage played on a loop across 3 local news channels. By noon, it had reached the national morning shows. By dinner, international outlets were running with it. Wedding night assault became greedy bride exposed, became millionaire mother-in-law's revenge. None of those headlines captured the truth. I closed all the blinds in my apartment and unplugged my landline. My cell phone vibrated constantly until I finally turned it off. The building's concierge called up to inform me that reporters were gathering in the lobby. Should I call the police, Ms. James? He asked, concern evident in his voice. No, Thomas. Just don't let anyone up. I paused. Except Harold and Clara from 1403, and my son, if he comes. Of course, Ms. James. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the walls closing in around me. This was exactly what I had tried to avoid my entire life. Public scrutiny, the harsh glare of attention. Robert and I had lived modestly not just as a financial strategy, but as a shield against the world's judgment. Now that shield was gone, shattered like my glasses on the ballroom floor. Clara arrived an hour later with a casserole and fierce protectiveness. Those vultures, she muttered, hanging her purse on the coat rack with more force than necessary. Don't they have anything better to report on than an entitled brat getting her comeuppance? It's not just about Avery, I said, accepting the casserole gratefully. It's about me now, too. They're digging into everything. My finances, my properties, my past. Let them dig, Harold said, closing the door firmly behind him. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Eleanor. I wasn't so sure. Not about shame exactly, but about exposure. About having my carefully constructed life pulled apart and examined by strangers who would never understand the choices Robert and I had made. The television continued to murmur in the background. I'd kept it on with the sound low, unable to completely disconnect from the storm raging around me. A familiar face appeared on the screen, and I froze. Turn it up, I whispered. Harold grabbed the remote, increasing the volume just as Avery's mother began speaking to a reporter outside what appeared to be their country club. Absolutely devastated by how this has all been portrayed, she was saying, her face a mask of practiced concern. Eleanor has always been difficult. We tried so hard to include her, to make her feel part of our family, but she insisted on living in isolation. When my daughter suggested, very kindly, that perhaps a smaller place would be more manageable for a woman of her age, Eleanor exploded. The reporter nodded sympathetically. And the slap we've all seen on video? Mrs. Morgan waved a dismissive hand. Edited footage. Avery was reaching out to steady Eleanor, who appeared disoriented. If anything, she was trying to help. That's a lie, Clara exclaimed, gesturing angrily at the screen. I've never heard such nonsense. It gets worse, Harold said grimly, pointing as Avery herself stepped into frame, dabbing at carefully manufactured tears with a monogrammed handkerchief. My husband and I are heartbroken, she said, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. We only wanted what was best for his mother. The apartment is so large, and she's all alone. We thought she might be happier somewhere more suited to her needs, somewhere with people her own age. The reporter frowned slightly. But, Ms. Morgan, Mrs. Robertson now, there's clear audio of you demanding the keys to the apartment, saying you deserved it more than, quote, some old woman living alone. Avery's expression hardened momentarily before she regained her composure. Those words were taken completely out of context. We were discussing a safety issue. Eleanor has fallen several times in recent months. We're concerned about her cognitive abilities. I gasped. I've never fallen, and there's nothing wrong with my mind. We know that, Harold reassured me, his hand on my shoulder. Anyone who's spent 5 minutes with you knows that. The interview continued, each lie more outrageous than the last. I was unstable. I was vengeful. I had been manipulating Nathan financially for years, dangling inheritance like a carrot to control his choices. By the end, I barely recognized the woman they were describing. This fictional Eleanor James was a far cry from the person I knew myself to be. Where's Nathan in all this? Clara asked, her voice tight with anger. Why isn't he defending you? As if in answer, the screen cut to another segment. Nathan standing outside what appeared to be Avery's parents' house, looking uncomfortable in the camera lights. My mother is an extremely private person, he was saying, shifting his weight nervously. This situation has been difficult for everyone involved. I'm just asking for privacy as we work through our family matters. But do you support your wife's version of events? The reporter pressed. Nathan hesitated, just long enough for my heart to clench with hope. But then he nodded. Avery has always had my mother's best interests at heart. That's all I want to say right now. I switched off the television, unable to bear any more. The casserole Clara had brought sat untouched on the counter. My appetite vanished. He's choosing her, I said softly. After everything. Harold and Clara exchanged glances. He's confused, Clara offered gently. Being pulled in different directions. Give him time, Eleanor. But time felt like a luxury I didn't have anymore. The world was spinning too fast. Events unfolding beyond my control. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. CNN tomorrow. Legal action possible. Call me. I showed it to Harold, who frowned. Legal action? Against whom? Avery, I assume. For assault. Or her parents, for defamation. I shook my head. I don't want any of that. I just want this to stop. It will stop, Clara said firmly. All news cycles end eventually. But as the evening wore on, the situation only escalated. Social media erupted with hashtags. Wedding slap, millionaire mother-in-law, Team Avery, Team Eleanor. People who had never met any of us were taking sides, dissecting seconds of video footage as if they contained profound truths. By nightfall, I had received emails from 3 talk shows, 2 publishers interested in my memoir, and a reality TV producer who thought the family dynamic would make compelling television. I deleted them all. When Harold and Clara finally left, promising to return in the morning, I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, overwhelmed by the surreality of it all. 24 hours ago, I had been getting ready for my son's wedding, full of complex emotions but hopeful for the future. Now I was at the center of a media firestorm, portrayed alternately as victim and villain, my private life laid bare for public consumption. I moved through the darkened apartment, touching familiar objects like a blind person finding their way. The leather chair Robert had loved, the bookshelf where Nathan's childhood trophies still stood, the windows, overlooking an Austin that felt suddenly foreign and threatening. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and reached for the old shoebox on the top shelf. Inside were letters, dozens of them, that Robert and I had written to each other over the years. On business trips, during brief arguments, sometimes for no reason at all except to put our feelings into words. I selected one from near the bottom, dated a month before his diagnosis. His handwriting, always so precise, filled the page with memories of our early years, dreams for our future, and one line that jumped out at me now. Remember, Ellie, no matter what storms come, your worth isn't in what you own or what others think of you. It's in the quiet dignity with which you face each day. I clutched the letter to my chest and finally allowed myself to cry. Not for the public humiliation or the painful estrangement from Nathan, but for the simple truth that Robert had always seen me clearly, had always known who I was at my core. If only he were here now to help me navigate these turbulent waters. But he wasn't, and for the first time in my long life, I felt truly alone. I woke to the sound of shouting. Disoriented, I stumbled to the window and peered through the blinds. The crowd below had tripled overnight. News vans lined the street, reporters with microphones stood at the ready, and a small group of people held signs, some supporting me, others condemning. "This is insanity," I muttered, stepping back from the window. The intercom buzzed and I pressed the button warily. "Ms. James, it's Thomas from the front desk. You have a visitor?" My heart leapt. "Nathan?" "No, ma'am, it's a Ms. Diane Lawson, says she's a lawyer." I frowned. I hadn't called a lawyer. "Did Michael send her?" "She says no, ma'am. She specifically mentioned she's not associated with Mr. Torres." I hesitated, then curiosity won out. "Send her up, please." 5 minutes later, I opened the door to a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper, hair cut in a practical bob. She wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase that had seen better days. "Ms. James, thank you for seeing me." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. "I'm Diane Lawson with Elder Justice Alliance. May I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing her into the apartment. "I didn't contact any organizations." "No, we contacted you." She set her briefcase on the coffee table and took a seat when I gestured to the sofa. "Our organization tracks cases of elder abuse, exploitation, and public harassment. Yours is currently making headlines across the country." I sank into Robert's old chair, suddenly exhausted despite having just woken up. "I'm not interested in becoming a poster child for elder rights, Ms. Lawson. I just want my privacy back." She nodded, sympathetically. "I understand completely, and we're not asking you to become any kind of public figure. What we are offering is support, legal, media management, and personal security if needed." "Security?" I echoed. "The situation is escalating, Ms. James. Your daughter-in-law's family has considerable social influence, and they're using it to shape the narrative. Meanwhile, you're essentially trapped in your home." She wasn't wrong. I hadn't set foot outside since returning from the wedding. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked cautiously. "First, legal representation to address the defamation happening on national television. Second, a media strategy that protects your privacy while still preserving your dignity. And third, a security assessment of your building and personal safety." I shook my head slowly. This all seems so extreme. It was just a slap. With respect, Ms. James, it was much more than that. It was a public assault followed by a coordinated campaign to discredit you, question your mental competence, and ultimately pressure you into giving up your home. She leaned forward intently. "This is textbook elder abuse, wrapped in a family conflict narrative to make it palatable to the public." Her words hit me with unexpected force. I had been so focused on the personal betrayal that I hadn't fully recognized the pattern she described. "And what would all this cost?" I asked. "Practical as always. Nothing. We're a nonprofit. Our services are covered by grants and donations." I raised an eyebrow. "There must be a catch." She smiled slightly. "No catch. Though we would appreciate if, once this is resolved, you might consider joining our board of advisors. Your financial expertise would be invaluable." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Turn on Channel 8. Now." I reached for the remote with a sense of dread. The screen flickered to life, showing the lobby of my building. Thomas, our concierge, was physically blocking Avery and her parents from entering the elevator. "She is my mother-in-law," Avery was shouting, her carefully crafted public persona nowhere in evidence. "I have every right to check on her welfare." Thomas, bless him, remained immovable. "Ms. James has left specific instructions about her visitors, ma'am. Your name is not on the approved list." Mr. Morgan stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this building tomorrow if I wanted to." The camera caught Thomas's slight smile. "The building isn't for sale, sir. And if it were, you'd have to speak with the owner, Ms. James." Avery's face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. Nathan, do something." The camera panned to reveal Nathan standing awkwardly to the side, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Maybe we should just call up Avery. If she doesn't want visitors, she doesn't get to decide that anymore," Avery snapped, before seeming to remember the cameras. She quickly rearranged her expression into one of concern. "We're worried about her mental state. She needs help." I turned to Diane, my decision made. I'll accept your help, Ms. Lawson. Where do we start? She opened her briefcase, revealing a laptop and several folders. We start by getting ahead of this narrative. The Morgans are painting you as confused and incompetent. We counter with evidence of your cognitive soundness and independence. How? Medical records? That's one option, but there's a simpler approach. She pulled out a document. This is a request for a voluntary cognitive assessment with Dr. Martin Chen, one of the most respected geriatric specialists in Texas. We broadcast the results, with your permission, of course, and undercut their entire argument. I took the paper, scanning it quickly. And if I pass with flying colors, which I will, then what? Then we move to phase 2, establishing the pattern of harassment and financial pressure. She produced another folder. I understand from Mr. Torres that you have extensive documentation of your financial support to your son and his wife? I nodded. Yes, though I never intended to use it against Nathan. Not against him, Ms. James, for your protection. She paused, her expression softening slightly. I know this is difficult. You love your son, but right now he's enabling behavior that's harmful to you. The truth of her words stung, but I couldn't deny their accuracy. On the television, security had arrived to escort the Morgans from the building. Nathan followed them out, looking back once at the elevator doors as if hoping I might magically appear. What about the media outside? The reporters? I asked, gesturing toward the window. We'll handle them. For now, you stay inside. Don't engage. We'll prepare a short statement that addresses the core facts without fueling the fire. She hesitated. There is one more thing, Ms. James. What's that? You need protection from further legal maneuvers. The Morgans are likely to attempt to challenge your competence in court, possibly seek conservatorship. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. They couldn't possibly. They can. Try. Wealthy families do it all the time to gain control of assets. She held my gaze steadily. Which is why I've brought preliminary paperwork to establish a living trust that would make such attempts nearly impossible. My mind raced with the implications. What had begun as a family conflict had escalated into something that required legal fortifications, all because I had refused to hand over my apartment keys. Do it, I said firmly. All of it. I won't be bullied out of my home or my dignity. Diane nodded approvingly. That's the spirit, Ms. James. Now let's get to work. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and strategic planning. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Chen had conducted a thorough cognitive assessment in my living room, pronouncing me sharp as a tack. By evening, the preliminary trust documentation was complete, with Michael Torres named as co-trustee alongside a neutral third party. Throughout it all, I kept glancing at my phone, hoping for a message from Nathan that never came. As Diane prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Ms. James, I want you to know something. In my 15 years with Elder Justice Alliance, I've seen hundreds of cases like yours. Different circumstances, but the same dynamics of control and isolation. You're doing the right thing by standing your ground. I managed a small smile. Thank you. I just wish it hadn't come to this. Family conflicts rarely start where they end up, she observed wisely. But remember, you didn't create this situation. You're just refusing to be its victim. After she left, I stood in my silent apartment, processing the day's events. In less than 48 hours, my life had transformed completely. I had gone from anonymous widow to public figure, from trusting mother to legal adversary, from private citizen to cause célèbre. The phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Unknown number. Hello? I answered cautiously. Mrs. James, this is Isabella Chen from Good Science. Morning, America. We'd like to offer you an exclusive interview to tell your side of the story. The nation is captivated by what happened at your son's wedding. And I hung up, unplugged the phone, and drew a deep breath. The vultures were still circling, but now at least I wasn't facing them alone. 3 weeks after the wedding, autumn arrived in Austin with crisp mornings and golden light. The media frenzy had gradually subsided, though occasional photographers still lingered outside Silver Oaks. My story had been replaced by newer scandals, pushing me back toward the anonymity I'd always preferred. In my living room, Diane Lawson reviewed our progress. The judge dismissed their petition for competency evaluation yesterday, she reported, satisfaction evident in her voice. Judge Ramirez was particularly unimpressed by their evidence, which consisted primarily of your preference for flip phones and your reluctance to use social media. I couldn't help but laugh. If technological resistance indicated mental decline, half the world would be declared incompetent. Exactly what the judge said. Diane closed her folder. The trust is secure, your medical evaluations were exemplary, and the Morgans' attempts to control the narrative have backfired spectacularly. I'd say we've weathered the worst of it. Thank you, Diane, for everything. I meant it sincerely. Her organization had provided the support and guidance I needed during the darkest days of this ordeal. After she left, I sat by the window overlooking the city I'd called home for 50 years. The trees in. The park across the street had begun their transformation, hints of amber and crimson appearing among the green. Life continuing its eternal cycle of change and renewal. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Check your email. Important. I opened my laptop. Yes, I did own one despite Avery's claims to the contrary, and found the message Harold had forwarded. It contained a link to a video with the subject line, "You should see this." With hesitation, I clicked. Nathan's face filled the screen. He sat in what appeared to be a hotel room, looking directly at the camera. Hi everyone, my name is Nathan James. By now, many of you have seen the video of my wife, Avery, slapping my mother at our wedding reception 3 weeks ago. You've heard different versions of what happened and why. Today, I want to tell you the truth, my truth. My heart raced as I leaned closer to the screen. First, I want to publicly apologize to my mother, Eleanor James. Mom, I failed you that night. I stood silently while you were disrespected and assaulted. There's no excuse for that, but I want to explain what led to that moment. He took a deep breath, his expression pained but resolute. For the past 2 years, I've been caught between the woman who raised me and the woman I chose to marry. I convinced myself their tension was normal mother-in-law, daughter-in-law stuff. I told myself my mother was just having trouble letting go. I believed Avery when she said she only wanted what was best for all of us. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. But the truth is more complicated. Avery wanted my mother's apartment from the beginning. She talked about it constantly when we were alone, how perfect it would be for us, how my mother was wasting it, how we deserved it more. I pushed back at first, but over time, her arguments started making sense to me. Or I wanted them to make sense because it was easier than standing up to her. My phone began ringing. Michael, probably seeing the same video, but I ignored it, transfixed by my son's confession. At the wedding, when Avery demanded those keys and then slapped my mother, something broke inside me, but I was still too cowardly to act. I watched my mother walk away with her dignity intact while I stood frozen, unable to choose between right and wrong. He looked down briefly, then back at the camera with new resolve. What you don't know, what the media doesn't know, is that my mother has been silently supporting me for years, paying off debts I thought had mysteriously disappeared, covering rent reductions I attributed to luck, even funding half our wedding through a corporate sponsor that never existed. Nathan, I whispered to the screen, you don't have to tell them everything. But he continued, seemingly determined to hold nothing back. After the wedding, I was angry and confused. I stayed with Avery and her family, believing their version of events because it absolved me of responsibility. But the truth kept gnawing at me. The night of the wedding, my mother didn't just reveal her wealth. She revealed my failure as a son. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his image on the screen. Yesterday, Avery gave me an ultimatum. Either support her petition for conservatorship over my mother, or our marriage was over. She didn't care about my mother's well-being. She didn't even care about me. She just wanted that apartment, and the money she now knew came with it. He held up what appeared to be divorce papers. So I made my choice. I'm filing for divorce. I'm cutting ties with the Morgans. And I'm publicly acknowledging that my mother, Eleanor James, was right all along. Not just about Avery, but about the importance of dignity, integrity, and standing up for what's right. Lessons she and my father taught me that I temporarily forgot. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes shining with emotion. Mom, if you're watching this, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to speak to me again. But I want you to know that I see you now. Your strength, your wisdom, your quiet dignity. And I'm so sorry I lost sight of that. The video ended, and I sat motionless, tears streaming down my face. My phone was ringing again. Harold this time, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. My emotions were too raw, too overwhelming. A soft knock at my door startled me. Wiping my eyes quickly, I crossed the room and looked through the peephole. Nathan stood in the hallway, alone, a small duffel bag at his feet. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then slowly, my hand trembling slightly, I unlocked the door and opened it. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice breaking. We stood looking at each other across the threshold, mother and son, separated not just by physical space, but by the weight of recent events. In his eyes, I saw Robert, the same earnest gaze, the same capacity for both mistakes and redemption. I saw the video, I said quietly. I meant every word. His eyes were red-rimmed but clear. I know I have no right to ask, but can I come in? Just to talk? I studied his face. The face I'd loved from the moment the doctor placed him in my arms 34 years ago. The face that had looked up at me with childhood wonder, teenage defiance, and adult pride. The face that had turned away from me at his wedding when I needed him most. And then, without a word, I stepped aside to let him in. Some doors, once opened, lead to paths we never expected to walk. Winter descended on Austin with unusual sharpness that year. December brought frost that etched delicate patterns on my windows and turned the breath of morning joggers in the park to silver mist. Inside my apartment, warmth prevailed, not just from the heating system, but from the gradual healing of wounds that had once seemed irreparable. Nathan had moved into a small studio apartment across town after filing for divorce. The proceedings were mercifully quick, with Avery accepting AO settlement once she realized the prenuptial agreement would hold and that Nathan's newfound backbone wasn't going to bend. The Morgans had retreated to their social circle, spreading modified versions of events that painted them as victims of media distortion, but few were buying it anymore. The video evidence was too clear, and Nathan's public statement too compelling. More coffee? I offered, refilling Harold and Clara's cups at my dining table. It was Sunday morning, our new tradition. Each week, my neighbors joined me for breakfast, and each week Nathan would arrive precisely at 10, bearing fresh pastries from the bakery near his new apartment. Thanks, Eleanor, Harold said, accepting the refill. Have you decided about the board position? I nodded, setting the coffee pot down. I told Diane yes yesterday. The Elder Justice Alliance does important work. If my experience can help others, I want to contribute. Clara smiled approvingly. You'll be wonderful. You have a talent for cutting through nonsense and getting to the heart of matters. The doorbell rang, right on schedule. That'll be Nathan, I said, moving to answer it. But when I opened the door, Nathan wasn't. Alone. A slender young woman with dark curly hair and intelligent eyes stood beside him, clutching a small gift bag. Mom, Nathan said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. This is Dr. Mia Patel, the professor I told you about from the community college. She's been helping me with my business plan for the youth center. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. James, Mia said, extending her hand. Nathan talks about you constantly. I took her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze. Please, call me Eleanor. Any friend of Nathan's is welcome here. As they entered, I caught Nathan's eye, raising an eyebrow slightly. He blushed, actually blushed, and gave an almost imperceptible nod. So it was like that. Interesting. Over breakfast, conversation flowed easily. Mia spoke passionately about her work teaching economics to first-generation college students, many of whom came from disadvantaged backgrounds. Nathan explained his vision for the Youth Entrepreneurship Center he was planning to open, using his business degree in a way that aligned with his newly reclaimed values. I was hoping you might consider being an advisor for the center, Mom, he said. The kids could really benefit from your financial wisdom. I considered the request. 3 months ago, such an invitation would have seemed impossible, the gulf between us too wide to bridge. Now, it felt like another step on the path to reconstruction. I'd like that, I said simply. After breakfast, while Clara showed Mia her photographs from a recent trip to Big Bend National Park, Nathan helped me clear the dishes. She's lovely, I said quietly, handing him a plate to dry. Mia? Yes, she is. He concentrated on drying the plate with unnecessary focus. We're taking things slow. She knows everything that happened. About the divorce, he hesitated, about how I failed you. You didn't fail me, Nathan. You lost your way for a while. There's a difference. He set down the dish towel and turned to face me. I've been thinking a lot about what Dad used to say about wealth, that its true value isn't in what it can buy, but in the freedom it gives you to live according to your principles. I nodded, surprised and touched that he remembered Robert's philosophy so clearly. I want you to know, he continued, that I'm not interested in the inheritance or the trust fund. Whether I ever see a penny of it doesn't matter to me anymore. Nathan, no, please let me finish. What I want to inherit from you and Dad isn't money or property. It's the dignity you both lived with, the quiet integrity that never wavers, even when tested. His eyes met mine, clear and sincere. That's the legacy I want to carry forward. In that moment, I saw not just my son, but the man Robert and I had always hoped he would become. Someone who understood that true wealth lay in character, not accounts. Later that afternoon, after everyone had left, I sat at my desk and opened the drawer where I kept my most treasured possessions. Among them was a small velvet box containing the key to our first property, the modest starter home where we'd brought Nathan as a newborn. Robert had kept it as a reminder of where we began. I took out the key, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. Then I reached for a piece of stationery and began to write, "Dear Nathan, this key opened the door to the first home your father and I purchased together. It represents not the beginning of our financial journey, but the foundation of our values, living within our means, investing wisely, and always prioritizing people over possessions. I'm entrusting it to you now, not as a symbol of inheritance, but as a reminder of your true birthright, the courage to stand for what's right, the wisdom to recognize what truly matters, and the compassion to help others along the way. Your father would be so proud of the man you've become, not despite your mistakes, but because you found the strength to learn from them. With all my love, Mom," I sealed the envelope, planning to give it to him next Sunday. Outside my window, the Austin skyline glittered in the early winter dusk. The city had changed dramatically over the decades, growing taller, more bustling, more cosmopolitan. Yet some things remained constant: the gentle bends of the Colorado River, the stubborn survival of century-old oak trees amid the concrete, the enduring power of truth to emerge, however painful its birth. In the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the life Robert and I had built together, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since that fateful night at the Rosewood Grand Ballroom. The slap that had echoed through my world had set in motion a chain of events I could never have anticipated. Pain and betrayal, yes, but also revelation, growth, and, ultimately, healing. I had not sought revenge. I had not descended into bitterness. I had simply stood my ground and allowed the truth to surface in its own time. The keys to my apartment remained where they always had, in my possession, opening doors to a home that was mine by right. But the true keys, to dignity, to integrity, to peace, those had always been within me, waiting to be recognized. As Robert had written in his final letter to me, "Remember, Ellie, no matter what storms come, your worth isn't in what you own or what others think of you. It's in the quiet dignity with which you face each day." Looking out at the city we had both loved, I whispered, "I remembered, Robert, I remembered." I